Rematriation is born from trauma. It is born from war. It is born from displacement. It is born from dispossession. And we can therefore not carry out a rematriation practice separating it from this brutal history that persists. Colonization continues in Puerto Rico. Displacement continues on this archipelago. Dispossession continues on this archipelago. Remilitarization is happening right now in this archipelago.
Saludos and welcome to the Rematriating Borikén podcast, where we discuss the journey to the essence of these islands, this archipelago and her surrounding waters, the restoration of our essence before conquests and continued colonialism, the reclamation of our collective healing and liberation. I am Yasmin Hernandez, creator of Cucubanación, artist, writer, activist, born and raised in Brooklyn, Rematriating Borikén. Welcome to another episode of the Rematriating Boricén podcast. Today, the day that I am sharing this, as I recorded it over the course of the past few days, but today, September 23rd, 2025, is the anniversary of the Grito de Lares Revolution. It is also the 20th anniversary of when the FBI assassinated Puerto Rican clandestine revolutionary leader of Los Macheteros, Filiberto Ojeda Ríos, at his home in Hormigueros. Today there will be first the mobilization that always happens, or the gathering that always happens in Lares, and then a march and a gathering at Filiberto's home, La Casa Museo Filiberto Ojeda Ríos in Hormigueros. If we think about this past Sunday, 2 days ago, was a new moon. New moons begin new cycles. We had a new moon in Libra, Libra being the astrology sign of balance. There was also a solar eclipse in Virgo, and yesterday there was the fall equinox. And I mention that because I make these episodes coincide as much as possible with the new and full moons. I specifically waited to post this for today with this anniversary. But this theme of balance, equinox, equilibrium speaks to the times we're living right now, with forces wanting more and more control. As I went to sleep last night, I could hear helicopters circling. We are seeing more and more military presence in Puerto Rico. And what is happening in our skies relative to this planet that we live in is a message to all of us that it's time to bring this balance, that the balance has been upset for too long, and it's the scales are tipping too much to one side, and that is the side of control, oppression, injustice, domination, and it's time to bring it back to the side of justice, of liberation for everybody.
The purpose of this recording is to speak on this month's theme of La Trinchera de Ideas, Rematriation conversations that we host every third Thursday in Cucubanación. And the theme of this month is Rematriation and Boricua liberation. El tema es la rematriación y la liberación boricua. The month of September is one that has, for me, always marked a series of reflections on Puerto Rican liberation with various states, including Pedro Albizu Campos, and one of his two natalicios, one of his two birthdays. The dude is so great that he has two birthdays. The one that was widely celebrated and still is September 12th, 1891. However, it is believed that Pedro Albizu Campos was actually born on June 29th, 1893. And he used both birthdays interchangeably. Some documents he includes the 1891 birthday in September, and in other documents he includes the June birthday. There have been other events that took place in commemoration of the September birthday. And I think it's all good for anyone to celebrate 2 birthdays instead of 1. In fact, Albizu deserves his whole month of celebration. April should be El Mes de Albizu, Abril de Albizu, for the ways that colonialism, for the ways that the empire battled against him to the point of causing his death. He wasn't overtly killed, but he was tortured. He was imprisoned most of his life. He was tortured with radiation, and as a result, became sick with cancer, and that is what he passed from on April 21st, 1965, exactly 2 months after Malcolm X's death on February 21st, 1965. Ramon Emeterio Betances, the author of the Grito de Lares Revolution of September 23rd, 1868, was born in Cabo Rojo, Puerto Rico, April 8th, 1827. Turns out that today, as I record this, I'm recording this on September 16th, and this is the day that Betances passed away. September 16, 1898. Today is the anniversary of his passing. Ironically, he passed after the invasion of the United States. For decades, he had warned Puerto Rico of the threat to the north. The 1868 Lares Revolution was actually to secure liberation from Spain, but he had long warned that the United States to the north posed another threat. And as he predicted, on July 25th, 1898, the U.S., under Navy General Nelson Miles, invaded through the south por la Bahía de Guanica. And so today is another anniversary. More anniversaries. September 20th marks 8 years since Hurricane Maria. We already had the anniversary of Hurricane Irma, which I believe is on September 6th. That's the day that I connected with. I don't know if it arrived that evening or that's the day. These things just last, like Maria did. And so the anniversary of Maria is September 20th. Other dates are September 23rd, El Grito de Lares, the revolution of El Grito de Lares of 1868. September 23rd, 1990, Filiberto Ojeda Ríos, clandestine revolutionary leader of Los Macheteros, removes an electronic monitoring device that had him under house arrest, does away with it on September 23rd, 1990, and 15 years later, the FBI surrounds his home in Hormigueros, Puerto Rico, launches a barrage of fire into his home. He single-handedly defends himself against the FBI in this standoff that lasted some time before taking a bullet to the clavicle. After that, was denied medical attention, even though medical attention tried to get through and lawyers tried to get through. FBI denied these, and Filiberto, at 72 years old, was left to bleed to death. 20 years since the assassination of Filiberto Ojeda Ríos. 20 whole years. I cannot believe it. I remember it vividly as it happened in 2005. I remember vividly being at the anniversary for the 10th commemoration. I had just moved here. We had just been here 1 year, a little over a year when that happened. And now, a decade later, 20 years has gone by and time has gone by. And I wish that we could say that for his sacrifice, his work, his effort and sacrifice, that we are closer to liberation today. The reality is being lived under the two current administrations in the US and here in Puerto Rico, where the current administration has opened Puerto Rico up for remilitarization under the US forces. Y pues, this all leads me, I'm sure there are many more anniversaries for the month of September that I am leaving out here, but my point being, discussing in this month the theme of Rematriation and Boricua liberation. There would be no Rematriation without conquest and colonization. This isn't me giving credit to those terms to say we exist because of this. It is to say that Rematriation is not born out of the fruitful beauty of the land. It is born from trauma. It is born from war. It is born from displacement. It is born from dispossession. And we can therefore not carry out a Rematriation practice separating it from this brutal history that persists. Colonization continues in Puerto Rico. Displacement continues on this archipelago. Dispossession continues on this archipelago. Remilitarization is happening right now in this archipelago. And so it is important to understand that the only reason why we need to rematriate is because we were taken from the womb. We were robbed from the womb. We were kidnapped from the womb. We were and continue to be kicked out and separated from this womb homeland of ours. We rematriate because we lost parts of ourselves. We were disconnected from our essence. We were miseducated to believe that everything we were was inferior and that we had to take on the likeness of our colonizer. And to this day, people still function with that mentality, working the jobs of the colonizer in order to sustain themselves. But in essence, it sustains the whole system. Rematriation is a liberation strategy. It is a practice, a decolonial practice that we engage in daily. So it's not enough to move and come here. It is also how we come, how we arrive. How do we interact with the communities that we're moving to, that we are in? Or prior to any move, how do we rematriate right where we happen to be? The military and corporations might have taken over our ancestral lands. There may not be ancestral lands to return to. You're going to come back to this homeland or to whatever your respective homeland is for allies listening that are not necessarily Boricua. What is the purpose and what is the function? I knew everything that I thought I could possibly know about whatever movement, about whatever history, about whatever procer. I painted all of this. I researched it. I did how many trips, like 8 research trips to Vieques. And I thought I knew so much. And I got here and I fell flat on my face because I was in shock about the shit that happens here. Sometimes we need to immerse ourselves to understand. If it's for us to understand, not everybody is meant to do this. Not everybody, please know, not everybody is meant to do this. Do not rematriate because you saw somebody do it and it looked cute. Your life's path this may not be your mission. And if it's not your mission, and for those of us who it is, and we arrive and we fall on our faces and we go through all sorts of like shit shows, like deep challenges, and it's our mission, and we want to be here. Those who may not be for, don't mess with it. Don't mess with it. Don't do it because you saw fulana and fulana had this and she had that and she was happy. O tuviste a Sutano estaba ahí sembrando, estaba feliz, lo que sea. This ain't about, oh, I got money to buy a house, I got money to buy land. We got to talk about there's some energetic and spiritual resources that are required for this. And when people walk a path, it's because ese camino que están caminando es adecuado a su proceso evolutivo. Whatever their life's journey is, whatever wisdom and experiences and skills they picked up along the way is what allows them to navigate that moment in their life. And sometimes we want what other people are living and how they're living and where they're living and what they're doing, but we don't see all the suffering that it takes to carry that or that it took to get there. So we got to be very careful about whatever steps we take and wherever it is that we're going, or whatever steps we're taking right where we are, that they are aligned with our each individual unique experience and journey. Because coveting what someone else has, that's some settler type shit. And a lot of times when we engage in that practice and we realize it's not flowing, people resort to a type of force. When something is not meant for you, it's just not going to come. And then some people, instead of seeing that and aborting mission, they enter a new phase, or it's like, okay, lo vamos a hacer a la cañona, a la fuerza. And that's what's still happening in 2025. So in order for rematriation to be a strategy, a liberatory strategy, please know how rematriation works for you and where you are meant to rematriate. Some of you are probably called to rematriate right where you are, which you can do, which I did for the decades that I was in New York. The work that I was doing was rematriation work right where I was until I was called to come to Puerto Rico. You don't have to physically be in Puerto Rico to rematriate. Some of us are being called to other lands, especially right now. Exile is a thing. It has long been. We may be called to other lands. And the same applies. That if we rematriate to our own body, which is really the main place we can rematriate to, then we can arrive with a sense of humanity and justice and a decolonial perspective wherever we go, so we don't go causing harm. We don't go displacing people. No nos vamos imponiéndonos. A liberation strategy does not impose itself on another. A liberation strategy does not displace another. Rematriation as a liberation strategy opens us up to the humility of reconnecting to the ways of our ancestors, to the ways of nature, of the land, of the waters, of the elements. We don't arrive places and throw concrete over water. We don't arrive places and throw concrete where trees once stood. That's some micro scales. You arrive and there's this tree, te está tirando todos estos frutos en el techo de tu hogar y lo tumba y le tiras concreto. That's the micro scale. And the macro scale is that this genocide comes into Palestine, and one of the first things they do is chop down these olive trees that are thousands of years old. A lot of us like to talk about the colonizer, but we don't really like to look at the ways that the colonizer lives in us. And I don't say that as an insulto. I say it because we've been educated by the colonizer to think like the colonizer, and the system was put forth by the colonizer to breed more people to serve its system. We may not realize all the ways the colonizer lives in us, all the ways we show up colonized, because it's so much harder to see that in ourselves. So rematriation is sorting through before you go anywhere. You could be whatever seat you're sitting in right now, or you're in your car, you're at an office, you're at your house, sitting with yourself and sorting through, esto es mío, esto soy yo, this is my authentic self. And this right here, this is conditioning, this is imposing, this was imposed, this was placed on me, this was forced upon me by school, by the military, by work, by my parents, by my family, by my peer group. This isn't mine. These belief systems are not mine. What is yours? That's the first lesson. That's the first strategy of rematriation. What is mine and what is legitimately and authentically me? When I start to strip away all of the conditioning, what is left there? And who are my peoples? And if I return, what am I returning to? And who are my peoples? And what is my relationship to my ancestors? Because there's those that we may know and want nothing to do with. And there's those who look out for us, but we have no idea who they are because we didn't know them in person. So how can we live our life to channel those lessons and that love that may be there for us from some ancestors? Not all ancestors. Not all ancestors are the most enlightened people. Same way we have sellouts selling us out today, a lot of our ancestors did the same. Who had discernment that you do with yourself about what's ours, what's mine, quién soy yo, quién, this voice in my head, is it mine? Is it a relative's? Is it judgment that's been imposed on me? And if I could freely choose from my heart of how I want to live and where I want to be and who I want to be, where will it take me? Where would it take me? Or am I living a life that is governed by the colonizer's standards? Are my definitions of success set forth by the colonizer? I need this many degrees, this many jobs, this many titles, this many this, this many that. My home has to be this much money. I need this many cars. And what rematriation is just understanding that there is a much more beautiful, deeper, rooted, connected human part of you that these systems work to undo, to the point that you may forget your truest essence. And rematriation begins with going back to your own womb, your own second chakra, your own seat of creativity, your own seat of emotions, to determine, how do I reparent myself today? If I could rework it all, what are the things I would give back? What are the things I would give away? And what is the life that I would step into right now? Start from there as a liberatory strategy. A lot of us are in the movement, hella colonized, hella perpetuating the harm of the patriarchy and of the empire in our own day-to-day speak, in our own day-to-day actions. Commanding, demanding, exigiendo, expecting to be cared for, raging at people when they can't care for us because we demand a certain standard in things. That's the US way. We have a certain standard of how we want to live our days and what we want to do. And then when you don't get your way, then it's like looking for someone who's going to provide it. And if someone cannot provide it for you, then there's a rage. And that's one of the issues with coming here from the States, or going anywhere from the States for that matter, is taking that sense of entitlement that the US seeps into our brains and recognizing that and picking up on that and stopping that shit. Catching ourselves when we do it. Can't demand nobody take care of us. No somos bebé. That's another conversation. Part of our humanity is knowing that everybody is at the brink. Even when we are at the brink of collapse, US entitlement makes us forget the possibility that the person we're demanding help and support from might be at the very same place or worse. We don't take it personally. We recognize that there is a system at work to ensure that every one of us feels like we are at the brink every day. Because it's very hard to battle, it's very hard to dissent, it's very hard to resist when we're not okay. Survival mode, has us tuning everything out and forgetting. And that is how you wake up one day to fascism and say, where the fuck did this come from? But it's been developing over decades, or it's always there and it never left. It's always been lurking. And you've seen it every day, and you felt it every day in the injustices that you felt and the injustices that you witnessed. But you didn't say anything because things seemed okay. This is what we're feeling as a collective. Last night, from when I record this, was the Trinchera de Ideas for the month of September, dedicated to this same theme of Rematriation and Boricua liberation. When we gather, the Trinchera de Ideas is the Rematriation conversation series. I've said this before in other episodes, pero Trinchera de Ideas is a quote. It comes from a quote de José Martí, que vale más una trinchera de ideas que una trinchera de piedras. A trench of ideas is worth more than a trench of rocks. And I love the idea in Colectivo Ile, who I worked with a couple of years back, started a series that I was actually specifically working with called Caldero de Ideas, which was a beautiful concept of doing these gatherings after El Huracán Maria, gathering communities and in particular women to discuss what their experience was and what they learned and what they saw as their community's needs. And it was a beautiful process. And so the caldero is the big pot. It's the cauldron. And so has so many implications from cooking, whether you're cooking a sancocho or making some sort of remedio, right? Like some brew, some medicinal brew. And so I like the term trinchera de ideas, or working with the same concept of ese, como lo decía Colectivo Ile, y como dicen tantas comunidades aquí en el archipelago, un intercambio de ideas, an exchanging of ideas and thoughts. And so when I saw the José Martí quote, I thought it was the perfect inspiration to give this title to this series of gatherings, because of him being José Martí, representing this, school of liberation de Cuba, and the proximity to that of Puerto Rico's plight for liberation. And trinchera referencing what my inspiration for the Rematriating Borikén project was, which was the Puerto Rico trench and all that it represents, and this concept of rising from the trenches or being thrown into the trenches, right? We think about warfare and trench warfare, and how many Puerto Ricans since 1917, when the U.S. joined World War I, were first made citizens and then strategically to then be drafted into every U.S. war since, or fight in every U.S. war since. The insane, disproportionate number of Boricua casualties during the Vietnam War. And so Trinchera de Ideas, a trench of ideas in honor of Cuban liberationist José Martí, is the gatherings that we do every third Thursday at Cucuba Nación. Last night was this topic of Rematriation and Boricua liberation and how those two intersect. And one of the things that I found very important to share and to kind of just comment on is the value of coming to a gathering in conversation and dialogue. With everything that's happening right now, a lot of people think that talk is cheap, and that we have reached a place where action is the only recourse or the only solution. And I am very much a believer that action is everything. Action in these times also moves us out of the slump of being, when we are inactive, then we're just there ruminating everything, and that's where fears take hold. However, I need to stress the importance of gathering to speak, to exchange ideas, to discuss, because the example that I brought up yesterday was that of El Verano de 2019, which was very much a reactionary gathering in terms of the march that brought together, like, I don't know how many thousands of people. I don't have the number right now of how many people gathered, and who has the exact number? Never. It's always an estimation. Pero yo no sé si llegaron 1,000,000 de gente a San Juan en la marcha grande que se dio durante el verano de 2019. And also, definitely, the participation of over 1 million bodies, if you consider the weeks that these manifestations were happening, if you consider the different manifestations that were happening. The reason why I talk about the march is that la gente se convocan, or la gente show up because of the frustration, the anger, the rage, the grief of the dishonored dead following Hurricane Maria. That these WikiLeaks with the dethroned governor Ricky Rosselló caught in this cyber chat with other folks from his cabinet talking about un Puerto Rico sin puertorriqueño, and also poking fun at the dead, at the loss, right? People take to the streets from that anger, and that is very valid, and that is very necessary. It is also reactionary. And I'm not saying that everything that happened in the verano de 2019 was reactionary, because there were some beautiful spaces que convocaron, como los perreos combativos. Ahí se vio hasta yoga combativa, or like events for children, or la convocación de motora, la convocación de kayaks, al mar, de lanchita y kayaks y eso. There were so many different manifestations, and then it spilled into other parts of the island, and it was a beautiful, beautiful thing to witness and be a part of. But when we work in that way, in masses, en masse, I should say, and we are pulling together different from people from different persuasions, different places, different struggles, different perspectives, then one of the things that we run into the danger of is that when the momentum fades, so too do the actions. ¿Ve? Ahí se vio una sola meta principal. Obviamente llegaron mucha gente con otras metas, right? There was a lot of folks that showed up there that were part of a bigger struggle, a bigger liberation struggle, and have this fondo, have this background, have this understanding. But when Ricky Renuncia becomes that one goal, and everybody united under that one goal, and that one goal was indeed met, he was forced to resign. But it was like a duplicate was put in his place, con Pierluisi. Otro PNP, another statehood party leader, just as corrupt, just as, with the same amount of shady shit under his belt as Ricky Rosselló. And then Jennifer Gonzalez, who's the person now opening Puerto Rico to military use. I don't also think that, I don't credit Jennifer with opening Puerto Rico for U.S. military use. I don't think that's how these things happen. We have to remember that Puerto Rico, the U.S. president has veto power over anything Puerto Rico does. We have to remember that Jennifer is a statehood leader and a Donald Trump supporter, aka Lambeojo, which means that she's going to do whatever she can to appease Trump's presidency so that she can get the outcome that she is wanting for herself and her party, and that is to be accepted as part of the United States as the 51st state. So they're willing to do anything. Here I am trying to like soften the blow and like give the benefit of the doubt to Jennifer by saying the point of all this is Homegirl doesn't have much power. So it's not her decision. It's not like she invites the military to come. I hope not, porque si sea de esa manera, pero entonces, Dios mío. But I really also believe the U.S. don't need no invitation. The U.S. needs neither permission nor an invitation from Jennifer to come up in Puerto Rico. Para mí, eso ya estaba pautado, ya estaba planificado. And so for her to get up on the air and say, yeah, come on down, then it makes it seem less terrible. Because when it was announced, like, yeah, they're going to be coming, I'm like, no shit, Sherlock, porque ya yo llevaba meses escuchando their jets, their helicopters. And whatever, they're here in various ways. But what we've noticed in the past month is an increase in activity. So that to me, that announcement that was made, and then all the, Piti Yankee politicians who followed suit saying, yeah, bring them down, or yeah, we're here to whatever. Like, I don't even want to repeat the stupidities that were said about Venezuela. All of that is a show. All of that is a show to claim a colonized alignment with the colonizer. It's like that experiment that kidnapped peoples in some way, shape, or form get to a place where they start to empathize with their kidnappers. It's like a psychological experiment that was done, that because then it's like your survival depends on that person. So you have to like build a rapport with that person to make sure that you get through that experience alive and all this crap. And that is how I see the colonized mentality, or the mentality of those that want to align and be like and be their colonizer. When our brains have been conditioned to believe that our success and our wholeness and our benevolence depends on assuming the identity of the colonizer. And, that's Frantz Fanon. That's the work that Frantz Fanon did in his books, in his research, in his work. And so going back to the conversation about coming together to talk these things out, is that what is needed to transcend? What is needed to transcend from event to event, activity to activity, on a reactionary scale, which is the rage of responding to something that they did, is a strategy, a common goal, which was had with the Rica y Renuncia. But then what is the collective desire? People use the terms liberation and independence interchangeably. I prefer the term liberation for all that it means, but also independence speaks for me. Estoy hablando de mi opinión. For me, independence connotes a political state, right? Where I see liberation as something much more holistic. Independence, I also connect to the way that the Independence Party and PIP, el Partido Independentista de Puerto Rico, might see it. And I have also expressed my personal stance, which is that I don't believe in a colonial situation being resolved via the electoral politics of the colonial government, the puppet colonial government, and certainly not the colonizer presiding over it and with veto power over it. I cannot have faith in a system that was set forth by the entity that we're trying to separate from. No tiene sentido para mí. Entiendo que hay gente que creen en un proceso democrático y participan de ese proceso electoral, right? People believe in a democratic process and in that electoral process. I'm not sure where they stand today in 2025, seeing what has happened in the US. Like I said, and it just kind of shows that the democratic process was always sketchy, if it ever even existed in the US. And so this isn't to say that I don't believe in those efforts, but it is to say that I go about it differently, and others and all of us go about it differently. I've worked with the people before. I've been in spaces that involved the people before. We can have different approaches, but we need to understand whose approach is what. We need to understand our own approach. We need to understand what everyone else's approach. Different approaches could have a similar goal and then come together as a coalition in understanding and respect for each other's strategies and each other's tactics. Even if we don't agree with them, we can choose to come together in that way. So, for example, the liberation of the Puerto Rican political prisoners. And even though they're trying to undo this, the removal of the U.S. Navy from Vieques are two campaigns and two movements that involved people of various political persuasions. You even had some statehooders up in those movements, and in the case of Vieques in particular. People from different persuasions coming together towards a common goal. And now we are talking about isolated or events that are unique, that are specific, como Ricky Renuncia, como los presos políticos, como Vieques. Y yo hablo más de Vieques porque lo de Culebra, we cannot forget what happened in Culebra, but the Navy was kicked out of Culebra in 1975, and that was the year that I was born. And for probably a good majority of us, we weren't even born in that time. So I don't speak to it because I don't know that struggle as well as I know the one of Vieques. But it's not to ever erase the fact that before the Vieques struggle existed, there was the Culebra struggle. Each of these struggles are colonial struggles. It's like that stencil that we see all over Puerto Rico now. El problema es la colonia. El problema es la colonia. The colonization is the problem. No es la colonia. Aunque la colonia es un problema también, pero más allá es el colonialismo. All of these things exist under colonialism, and what happens is that we start to target one thing at a time. That might be a very successful way to go about it. But what we also see is that as one thing is separated out from the colonialism problem, you might see that one thing resolve, but the effects may not necessarily be long-lasting, like Vieques. Like, how many thousands of people from Vieques, from Puerto Rico, from the planet who came together in solidarity to get the Navy out of Vieques. How many of them were arrested? How many of them sacrificed? How many people were sacrificed? How many people got sick from the contamination? How many people died from that contamination? David Sanes Rodriguez, Angel Rodriguez Cristobal, both lost their lives in that movement, or as a result of the military presence there. Only for today, 2025, the governor to say, come on down, military. We sure want you back up. You could use anything you got to use. You could use our air, you could use our water, you could use our land, you could use whatever. Hasta los fundillos nuestros pueden usar. And there's no longevity, there's no ideology behind it. There's nothing bringing people together that says, ultimately, this is what we envision for our future. Lo que lo han hecho muy bien son los estadistas que no han pensado más allá de lo que ser estadista. Ser estadista tan desesperadamente, and we're down for whatever, as long as we make it there. Because how else could you open up yourself and your people in this way, and when your people have clearly spoken that this is not what they are wanting for themselves? How dare you as a politician claim to speak for the people, those that voted for you? Because I didn't vote for you, and I didn't vote for no one, and this is why. They claim to speak for the people and then sell them out, knowing that they're going against the will of the people. So the importance of coming together to have these conversations, like before, if we're going to discuss rematriation as a strategy, as a liberation strategy, rematriation and Boricua liberation. How many of us even talk about rematriation beyond the hashtag and beyond the move? What does rematriation mean for us? With all the work being done in Turtle Island by Indigenous communities that are bringing these principles into their work, into their day-to-day life, into the collecting and the preservation and the rematriation of seeds. Again, rematriation exists because we were colonized, because our people were taken from our lands, displaced, dispossessed. So that re-prefix connotes we got to return, we got to rematriate. Tenemos que reclamar, reclaim, retomar, retake those things that were taken from us. And in the case of Indigenous communities throughout Turtle Island, and the same happens in Palestine, foods, people being separated from the trees that nourished their people for thousands of years. That's how deep this runs. So rematriation is not a hashtag. It's not getting on a plane and landing because you bought a house somewhere. It's not coming because you retired and now you're just going to chill. And mucho más. And in order for us to engage in these practices, we need to be having deep conversations about these practices, what they are, what they mean. For what purpose do we take them on, align with them, and practice and engage in them? In order to practice these in community, with a deep understanding that has roots stretching deep, deep, deep into the earth, that one event can't just knock us off. That if you have this idea of rematriation, you're going to rematriate, you're going to come, you're going to move, and then like a month later, you find that nothing works out for you and you just go back. If you tie this whole concept to just getting on a plane and coming here, and what happens if it doesn't work out and you return? Do you stop rematriation? So when we have these very superficial definitions of things, then they become fleeting. And how do these practices, how do these liberation practices that we must engage in, if this is what we are wanting, how do they become long-lasting? How are they effective? How are they far-reaching? My rematriation won't look like your rematriation, his rematriation, her rematriation, their rematriation. Everybody's rematriation journey is different. And so we must first define for ourselves, what does rematriation mean for us? Uniquely us, specific to our journeys. And what does rematriation mean for the collective? What does liberation mean for us in our vision, in our ideal, in our hearts, and in our journeys? And what do you envision as liberation for the collective? And so that was how I closed last night. That's how we closed the conversation, with the homework for each of us to consider, to think, to discuss, to answer these questions for ourselves. And they are, how is rematriation a liberation strategy for us personally? How is rematriation a liberation strategy for us spiritually? How is rematriation a liberation strategy for us politically? Because we can't separate the political. We can't separate empire. We can't separate colonialism as the reasons why rematriation must exist in the first place. Unfortunate. Just like talking about this reactionary stuff, I don't like to do anything having to credit them and credit that. But if we were never removed and colonized and dispossessed, there wouldn't be the need to return. That return exists because of this. So then the question is, how is rematriation a liberation strategy? Politically, for us. And now, how is rematriation a liberation strategy for the collective? We must define that for ourselves, and we must define that as a collective. We are all here. Liberation is collective work. Liberation is for the collective benefit. It's not about how it benefits you. That is part of it. That is absolutely valid. And in fact, I think it needs to spring from that. It has to spring from that. And it has to be personal. And that's why I include personal, because not a lot of conversations around political work speak to the personal responsibility. So when people talk about decolonizing, and they talk about, I'm going to go, we got to free Puerto Rico. We got to free Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico becomes the damsel in distress. Everybody's going down there to free Puerto Rico, down here, wherever. But a lot of people don't think about how they got to free themselves or decolonize themselves. But the other truth about when we came in 2014, very few people were coming to Puerto Rico. And when we talked about coming, the first thing that was asked was, how are you going to sustain yourself? But you don't have a job, but how are you going to do this? But how are you you're going to come back. That was the narrative back then. So we were going against the current in all sorts of ways. The narrative today in 2025 has radically shifted. People are leaving the States in droves. They're not talking about it openly. But people are leaving, especially the rich who have the means to do it. They're leaving. People are packing their pickup trucks, driving back across the border to Mexico. There is a shift in how people perceive their homelands. The homelands that everyone said they had to leave for a better life. And for a better life, you have to go to the US. And now that entire dynamic has been threatened, or has been exposed rather, as false. This needs to trickle down to Puerto Ricans at some point, because there's a lot of Puerto Ricans still there thinking that that's where to be for all these opportunities, even though our migrant cousins are facing all this injustice, all this inhumanity, all these detainments and deportations. When we came, it was not the thing to do. And since we came, there have been waves of people building in their desire to come to Puerto Rico. So there was a wave that came after Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Maria passed, 3 years here. I was here for 3 years when Hurricane Maria passed. The people who came after Hurricane Maria, those are some like diehard mofos. Because you have to be, you have to be, after seeing what happened with Maria, to be like, ay, yo me voy para allá. And that's what people did. And I know a lot of people who came after Maria, they felt so drawn here. And that is some hardcore stuff. That's some beautiful hardcore stuff. There was another wave that came with the pandemic. That was, I think, the first place where people realized that New York or the metropolis was not the be-all, end-all, and in fact was not a secure, safe place to be because of concerns of, being ill and the crowding and people losing work and people losing community with the quarantine, and people wanted to be in a quieter place, and there was a flight out of the city. New York City and other cities, to campos, to like less populated areas. in the States, and in the case of Boricuas in the diaspora, coming back home to Puerto Rico. And then since then, all of a sudden, since then, I feel, is when the rematriation thing started to catch up as like the hashtag. Because now it became necessary to leave. There were more push factors rising. And today in 2025, people are rethinking. My feed is filled all the time with people talking about y'all need to rethink a second place where you can live legally. Where are you going to go to? So a lot of people are thinking about their own respective homelands or which other land is a good place to go to. This raises so many dynamics that can make this conversation be like 5 hours long and that I can't get into right now. I think in particular of Palestine. I think of all these colonial settlers that are ready to occupy bombed out Gaza. Never mind the contamination that's there. Never mind the destruction. Do you know what it does to someone's lungs to breathe in pulverized concrete that's been bombed? Do you know what it does? We already know what it did and is doing to Palestinians. But you have Zionists empeñado in claiming these lands for themselves, that they are willing to bring their families into the rubble, into contaminated rubble, into mass grave sites to say, this is our land, not yours. The conversation of migration has been turned into a whole damn disaster. And the same people that will criminalize migrants for arriving to the States for better opportunities as they believed are the same people packing their shit, those with the privilege and the money, packing their shit and going elsewhere. As my husband calls them, American immigrants. Because why? They gotta be the only people that are expats, quote unquote. Everybody else are immigrants, but when they go elsewhere, they're expats. They get like this special title. No, just like the people you criticized. Coming into Turtle Island, the land that you sit on occupied. The indigenous land occupied. That you terrorize others to keep control of. Within that shit show, it becomes our responsibility to understand what rematriation is. And that if here in Puerto Rico and in our diaspora, we are going to use the term rematriation, which is a sacred term, and it's a sacred thing for the indigenous people of Turtle Island, that we need to hold to the sanctity of that word. How we use that word cannot be a distortion, cannot be a manipulation for our own personal benefit. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that my connection to that word, rematriation, stems from its root of matriz, the womb. It is an ode from me to my midwife abuelas. It is an ode to me on my own liberation journey to reclaim home birth. As a woman born from a womb that was sterilized right after I came out. What would have happened if that sterilization happened after my sister was born? I would not be here today. That sterilization y esa operación is what was talked about incessantly in my family, and I heard as a child women always ask each other, ¿Tú estás operada? Even when I would visit here, people would ask me, ¿Tú estás operada? Because it became so normalized and so common for women to be sterilized. But the conversation that was really had in my family was the fact that in my maternal lineage, there were all these parteras, there were birth workers, women who helped others be born. And if it wasn't for these parteras and birth workers that birthed us through conquest, through colonialism, through the captivity of chattel slavery, none of us would fucking be here today. And so I had to reclaim this tradition, this ancestral tradition of birthing in a peaceful, empowered way with a midwife. At home, on my own terms, because I could. And to give my body the chance to do that, and to know that if for whatever reason something went awry, then there was the resource of hospitals and obstetricians that could help me. But in my personal path, on my liberation, on my rematriation journey, I was called to recover, to reclaim the ancestral ways of my abuelas. So when I arrived in Borikén, I said, without knowing who my abuelas were, I said, I arrived at the womb. In English, yo siempre decía, I arrived at the womb. And so to use the term rematriation, I rematriated, I returned to the womb that birthed my mother, my father, my abuelas, and my abuelos. For several generations, because before those generations, they were born in St. Thomas, they were born in Curaçao, and God knows where else. We must hold the term rematriation as a sacred term and not make a mockery of the displaced and dispossessed peoples across this planet. Our own included, ourselves included. And when we try to reclaim anything, understand that we are reclaiming it as a strategy of liberation for ourselves and the collective. We're not displacing anybody to reclaim anything. And that's why we must know personally what we are reclaiming. For me, rematriation and liberation are synonymous. Other people use the term re-indigenize, which is beautiful because to reclaim is different than de. It's different than decolonize. It's different than undoing. It's the taking off versus what we are taking back. And the reason why I don't use re-indigenize right now is because our history here in the archipelago of Puerto Rico is more complex. My bloodline includes other bloods, those maternal abuelas that were birth workers. Their bloodline comes from Africa, unlike the majority of Puerto Ricans whose DNA comes from an indigenous woman. I do have indigenous blood, but it is not the only blood in my veins. So for me, rematriation speaks to grounding and centering and reclaiming this womb that in its complex history has held other people displaced from other places, other people held captive on these soils. When we speak rematriation, Boricua rematriation as a strategy of Boricua liberation, I am reminded of Pedro Albizu Campos, born in Tenerías, a community founded by recently emancipated people in Ponce. I am reminded of Marisa Rosado's biography that speaks of Tenerías, that speaks of Albizu's ombligo, buried at the foot of a ceiba tree, and these ancestral practices that we keep. I am reminded of my sister collecting all the fallen belly button stumps after our dog gave birth. As little girls, we knew in Brooklyn this practice of saving our ombligos. And we needed those to root. We needed to plant those in the soil. That part we didn't remember. Look at how our traditions get displaced. The tradition became in Brooklyn to save the belly button stump. Pa que no se sabía. And as an adult, I learned that it's saved because it's supposed to be planted. But the question is, in what ground when you've been displaced to another soil? So to save it is the concept, to save it and one day return and ground to that soil by planting it there. There are things that we don't know, and we only have half-truths as we get separated from our origin and our source. And so to rematriate is to also rescue these things that we lost. So we're starting a new trajectory, and that is that of rematriation and liberation. In the same way that I didn't know that second half of the story as to why you collect that fallen belly button stump if you don't have access to your placenta. It wasn't until I was here living in Borikén for several years that I learned that my abuelas were parteras. So the story of sterilization replaced the story of these heroic women that ensured the birth of a new Boricua. Mira qué cosa. Mira qué cosa. Look at how the colonial narratives replace our own ancestral stories. My abuelas and their necessary sacred birthwork faded into the background, and the story that got told was that of sterilization, the new imposed norm. The focus is not to celebrate and welcome the birth of new Boricuas, but to prevent the birth of new Boricuas, and that we become the perpetuators of our own demise. So rematriation for me is that return to the womb. And sometimes we can't always come to the womb, because that womb lives in us. That womb lives in our bones and in our DNA. And sometimes in order to make possible any migration, you first need to tap into all the information already stored in you. You need to activate that dormant ancestral wisdom that was born in you, that lives in your bones, that lives in your stem cells, that lives in your blood. Because it's there. You just need to activate and awaken it. And that you do wherever the heck you are. Eso empieza donde quiera. Tú no necesitas un pasaje, ni una maleta, ni una casa, ni una propiedad para hacer ese trabajo. Tú puedes estar en Brooklyn or Chicago or wherever you are. And speaking of Chicago, I will end with, it was a joy to receive Denise Ruiz of the Honeycomb Network. We were blessed with the most recent rematriation journey, which was 5 days in Borikén. I am overjoyed to have received that beautiful new energy of someone who just returned, someone who just arrived fresh from Chicago, the beautiful, beautiful work that she did in Chicago via the Honeycomb Network. And I'm so looking forward to seeing what she births in Borikén. Again, we're not just here coming back to the womb to be reborn as ourselves, but the womb is calling us back because she wants us to birth something unique here for the benefit of the collective. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. Thank you for trusting in mine, in yours, and in our collective journey. Many blessings, gentle transitions through this solar eclipse. Necessary things are closing for us. Beautiful things are being born. Gracias, gente. You can tune into future episodes every new and full moon. For more information about the project, you can visit rematriating.com. That's rematriating with an M, and Borikén with Ken. And Rematriating Borikén is also on Instagram and Facebook. So you can follow us there. If you like this, please give a like and a share. If you want updates for future posts, subscribe to this channel on YouTube. And thank you again so much for listening. In light always. This is Yasmin.